Welcome to the channel, everybody. My name is 11new, and in this channel, we'll be talking about the neighborhoods of Boston. So if you're interested in learning more about Boston, then you come to the right place. So each neighborhood has its own people, its own culture, and its own theme to it. So for this first episode, we'll be talking about no other than East Boston. Now, I know this isn't the first neighborhood you might think of, but trust me, Eastie has a lot to offer. So let's get started. East Boston, the Staten Island of Boston, home to numerous communities from around the globe. Annexed in 1836, Eastie became one of Boston's many neighborhoods. It is predominantly Latino, with the majority from Brazil, Colombia, El Salvador, and Guatemala. With a population of over 40,000, it is one of the most densest neighborhoods in the city, given its small geographic size. It is part of Suffolk County, along with Chelsea, Revere, and Winthrop. But how did East Boston become this way? Who were the first people that settled here, and how did they contribute? Today, I'll be answering that along with many other events. This is the history of East Boston. To understand the area better, we first got to look at where Eastie sits. Eastie is separated from the mainland of Boston via the Boston Harbor. Eastie sits northeast of downtown with access through the Ted Williams and Sumner Tunnel, which are about a mile long. Before it was annexed, it had consisted of 5 islands off the shore of downtown. Noddle's Island was the biggest, and Hogg's Island as well. And these two would later take its shape into present-day East Boston. The founder of East Boston, William H. Sumner, would play a major role in the neighborhood's economy. In 1801, Sumner had inherited a large area of Noddle's Island and noticed the possibility for Boston to expand. He proposed to the government a turnpike connecting downtown to Eastie, but was rejected in turn for a route through Chelsea connecting to Charlestown Navy Yard. And as you may know, it is now the Tobin Bridge that connects the two neighborhoods. But Sumner was determined to make the island an asset, and in 1833, Sumner partnered with Stephen White and Francis J. Oliver to purchase half of Noddle's Island. Together they formed the East Boston Company, and by 1834 they had full control over the island. At the same time, Sumner planned a grid street layout in anticipation for population growth. Today, Jeffreys Point is the first area of East Boston to be settled, following Maverick Square, Central Square, and Eagle Hill. Around 1834, a bridge was built to Chelsea by the East Boston Lumber Company. Roads were built, and soon residents began to populate the Eagle Hill. The Boston Sugar Refinery also formed at this time, which was the first manufacturing business in East Boston. Next year, in 1835, 10 wharves were built along the coast of East Boston, which housed ships for building and transport. Later, this would become the maritime industry for the area. But Eastie still had a lack of transportation from downtown. To fix this, steamboat trips were provided to locals, and by 1836, Eastie had reasonable development and was finally annexed to Boston. Because of its recent developments and industry, Eastie became a great attraction for working immigrants, largely Canadians, Irish, Jewish, and Yankees were the first to settle. In 1840, there were only 1,400 residents, but by 1865, it had broken into a population of 20,000. When you think about East Boston today, you may think about Santarpio's Pizza, and you would be right. At one point, East Boston was home to Italians. During the 20th century, that's when they started moving in and would become the neighborhood's identity. Largely, they settled in Orion Heights, And in fact, Orion Heights is home to the Queen Madonna Shrine, which is the huge cross that you see on top of the hill in Orion Heights. That's the Queen Madonna Shrine. And that's where the Italians brought their own culture and religion. And you would see a lot of this happen with other people groups bringing their own religion as well. And there's also many businesses, Santarpio's, but also Meridian Market, Spinelli's, and Soninoto's, which is gone now, but you get the point. Like, at one point there was a lot of influence, and today it still stands a lot. By the 1900s, there were about 40,000 people living in East Boston, which is the same as it is today. So 100 years ago, they were the same population as it is. And in fact, it peaked at about 65,000, I believe, in 1920, I want to say. But yeah, that's to put it in perspective. People would continue to populate the area. Now, if you look at it on a map, Meridian Street is the main street that intersects East Boston. There would be streets that connect from the hill down to Meridian Street and eventually to Maverick. It was so accommodable that there were even trolleys that went through the streets of Eagle Hill. One specifically was Lexington Street. If you see in this photo, was surrounded by trees, single family homes, and this is basically the people's way of getting everywhere. It was just the trolley walking, and you can see like just how beautiful it was. With the population growing, East Boston began to see the rise of triple-decker homes, which are the same you see throughout Dorchester. They were both spacious and affordable for all people. Meridian Street still has these homes. Many feature porches, columns, etched designs on the facade, and are totally built of wood. Now, Eastie is also home to other squares. So, as I talked about Eagle Hill, now we're going to talk about Maverick Square. It is a transportation hub. It is the gateway to East Boston via ferry and train service. And in fact, the first underwater tunnel in America was built in 1905 on Maverick Square. Today, Maverick is one of the MBTA's Blue Line stops and is surrounded by businesses and restaurants, along with historical buildings like the East Boston Savings Bank. And you can see like how revolutionary that was back then, and it still is today. Next up, Central Square. Central Square was left by the East Boston Company in 1833 as an open space with an oval park in the middle. Commercial businesses surround the square, and like Lexington Street, the trolley also ran through it from Maverick Square and would terminate at Chelsea Square. Today, the park still stands and is surrounded by businesses and the nearby Liberty Plaza. The park itself has undergone renovation in 2016 and is now bigger and greener. Lastly, we have Day Square. Now, I didn't talk about Day Square, but Day Square is basically the intersection of Bennington Street and Chelsea Street. It is wide and triangular shaped, and it mainly features restaurants and businesses. There are many Latin American restaurants that you can eat here, like La Cabana, Pueblo Viejo, and my favorite, El Jalisco. Spinelli's is also located here. It's exclusive. There's only 2 locations. One of them is East Boston and the other one is in Linfield. It's a pastry shop, so you can buy your cake here. They also sell pizza there too if you want it. Let's talk more about transportation. So you may know that East Boston was very transit oriented. I mentioned the trolleys that ran through Meridian Street, and at around the same time in 1875, the Boston, Revere Beach, and Lynn Railroad also serviced the area. This was also called the Narrow Gauge Railroad because it featured a width of 3 feet instead of 6 feet on the tracks. The Narrow Gauge Railroad began at Jeffreys Point and would go underneath Webster Street before making its next stops at Wood Island and Orion Heights. And with the completion of the underwater tunnel, the railroad was at its peak until the Great Depression had arrived. Low ridership was one problem, and with the completion of the recent Sumner Tunnel in 1934, vehicles were seemingly more attractive. In 1937, the railroad filed for bankruptcy, and on January 27, 1940, it ceased all operation. With more cars on the road, this likely led the streetcars to be replaced with buses, and eventually the MBTA would provide the bus routes we see today. Now, with the more people coming to East Boston, Boston suddenly needed a station to house the many immigrants that were coming. So, in April of 1920, the immigration station was built and was located in 287 Marginal Street. It could house up to 582 people at a time and was meant for anyone arriving to Eastie by ship. In 1959, the building was ultimately accessed by the General Service Administration. At this point, air travel was becoming more common and service would continue to decline. The building was auctioned in April of 1959 and would switch hands multiple times before being bought up by Massport in 1987. In 2011, the building was demolished to expand the shipyard there is today. Like I mentioned before, air travel was becoming more common. So, with that came the airport. Now, you may know Eastie for its airport. Yes, airport is on East Boston land. The airfield first opened in 1923, and in 1929, it began servicing passengers. In the 1940s, Apple Island and Governor's Island were landfilled to expand the airport. But by the 1970s, Logan Airport had expanded to Wood Island under the Massachusetts Port Authority, the same people who bought the immigration station. This caused displacement among Neptune Road and Lavelle Street. The once abundant greenery surrounding Wood Island Park is now gone. The park was designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, the same designer who designed the Emerald Necklace. At 83 acres, it was a place for residents to wind down and have fun in all seasons. As a supplement, the Port Authority created 4 small walkways called airport buffer zones, planting trees alongside each path. But the memory of Wood Island Park still stands, and the displacement of many residents will never be forgotten. Today, the airport carries 20 to 30 million passengers annually, making it the 49th busiest airport in the world and the 16th busiest in the US. With air travel becoming more frequent, it required more road space to travel between Eastie and downtown. So the Summer Tunnel was first built in 1934 to serve that purpose. It connects East Boston to downtown through a mile stretch of tunnel under the Boston Harbor. In its construction phase, though, homes were torn down much like Neptune Road was. And in 1961, the parallel Callahan Tunnel opened, which also tore down homes. So those homes were right next to London Street and Havre Street. And basically there were houses all along that corridor. And it basically got destroyed for all of that tunnel space. Both tunnels serve millions of vehicles annually, especially from the airport and the North Shore area. It was attractive for people to have easy access to Boston through the automobile, which really began to spring up in America during the 1950s. And here's a little fun fact. The Summer Tunnel didn't have electric tolling until 2016. So before 2016, you had to wait in a line of traffic to pay through the booth. Could you imagine just like getting through all of that traffic and only just arriving at the tunnel? Anyway, speaking of tunnels, the Big Dig project had a big impact among the community. With the airport traffic, it caused congestion among locals as well as people trying to get from the airport to downtown or from the North Shore to downtown. So, as a solution, the Big Dig had planned on building another tunnel, but that tunnel would plow its way through the neighborhood. But the community refused that the Port Authority take more of their neighborhood. So the project was compromised by using a section of the airport's land to lead towards the Ted Williams Tunnel. I think that's a really good feat for the East Boston community. It has been taken advantage of, and little has been done to offer some assistance or some recognition for how amazing the community is. So I think it's a really good thing that East Boston, the community, came together and said, no, we're not going to let this happen. That's a great feat. Now, with all that said, East Boston continues to be a thriving community. Since the 1990s, it has seen a growing Latino population in which they shaped the environment. As soon as you get to Maverick Square, you notice the array of local businesses surrounding the station, which continues through Meridian Street. Signs that are posted are almost always written in Spanish. The food is amazing. There are all many traditional dishes that are homemade here. Passing by people, you notice not just Spanish, but the different accents that travel through the place. Because of this attraction, recently there has been an influx of young Americans moving to East Boston. They rent newly renovated apartments and complexes, which has begun the cycle of gentrification. Apartments have skyrocketed in rent prices, actively pricing longtime residents out of the city. Still, Eastie continues to be resilient through its activism, culture, and resources available to anyone who says, "Hola." But yeah, that's pretty much it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoy, and tell me if I could improve or what you liked about it. Please feel free to comment down below what you think. It really helps me out.